everything, all the institutions have been co-opted. So one part of the institutional network makes the claim and another part supports the claim with no evidence, like journalism. I mean, journalism should be looking at threats to itself. It is my view, and it's getting stronger by the day, that actually these internet giants like Facebook, Google own YouTube, Twitter, Apple, Amazon, they are actually simply front operations. And then when you come from that perspective and you look at what they're doing, well, if you were a military intelligence network and you're trying to keep from the population what you're doing and what your agenda is, what would you want to do? You'd want to control the information that people were allowed to see or not see, because that's what these people do, and that's what the Silicon Valley giants are doing. You'd want to keep surveillance on the population 24/7, so you knew what everyone was doing or could have access to it very quickly if you needed it. And this is what proper journalists should be doing, questioning this stuff and asking why we have a world of 7.5 billion in which 5 people at Google, YouTube, and Facebook can dictate what people see and don't see worldwide. That's what proper journalists should be doing, but unfortunately we don't have them. And you're absolutely right. But there's 2 reasons why. One, so many journalists are absolutely clueless about the world. In fact, the vast majority. In my life, I've had so many facets of my life, and I've met enormous amounts of people. And the 2 professions that I found, in my experience, know less or least about what's really happening in the world are journalists and politicians, lower level politicians, rank and file politicians, even up to cabinet rank and even prime ministers that don't really know what's going on in the world. But you look at those 2 professions and they're A, directing the world, B, reporting those directing the world, and most of them are absolutely clueless. But there's another reason you talk about in terms of why journalism is as it is, and that's because of the consequences of not towing the line. The worst kind of censorship, the most insidious censorship, is self-censorship, where you don't put something forward for broadcast or publication because you know, A, it won't get used, and or B, it's bad for your career. And so instead of having even an argument, even a discussion in an editorial meeting about why something should be broadcast or published or it shouldn't, even that doesn't take place anymore because you simply don't put it forward. And you certainly don't ask questions that the system in general doesn't want people to ask because your career would take a very quick downward move. But these are the pressures, and I understand them on journalists, one being lack of awareness of the world and the other one being I've got to pay the mortgage. But I've reached the point a long time ago where the consequences for me don't enter the equation of whether I'll do something or won't do it. I do it because I believe it's right. I do it because I believe people need to know this information so that they can see another version of events. And the consequences for me are frankly irrelevant, because for me to consider consequences of doing what I do would be to consider not doing what I do because of the consequences. And that thought process never happens. A lot of people won't realize this, but they're replacing journalists increasingly, not least in America, with algorithms who are writing the news. You would think fantasy land, but that is what is happening.
Well, like you were saying, that the journalism in this country and perhaps globally is becoming repeaters, is the sort of word I think you use, rather than questioning, who's to benefit. It just repeats the press release. I suppose, that's happening as a result of job cuts, and in terms of newspapers, they're slowly running out of money, so there's less chance for reporters to go out there. But with the national newspapers, you would have thought they would have the guts to maybe challenge the government. But I suppose you have a picture of an overall web, and that also includes the media moguls. So do you think maybe that's a reason that Western governments aren't challenged as much, because of the vested interests of the people who own these big newspaper groups?
Well, what I've found established over the decades is that when you say a few people are controlling and directing human society, the initial reaction is that's impossible. There's too many people. But, I'm the kind of guy that if I'm doing a jigsaw puzzle, I want to get that frame in place first. All the straight bits, I want the frame there, and then I'll start putting the pieces in the body of the picture. I want the structure started to realize that actually the world was not controlled in the way that I thought it was. And in many ways that started on the Isle of Wight, just very briefly. I came to live here in 1982. I've been in love with the place all my life, since I used to come on holiday as a kid in the 50s, 1950s. And I saw that things were being done on the island in terms of building, etc., that were completely out of keeping with the environment and were destroying the whole feel of lovely places. So I started an organisation with others on the Isle of Wight called Island Watch, which all it did basically was look at the planning applications every month and see if they were ones that were detrimental to the environment or the whole atmosphere of the Isle of Wight and character of the Isle of Wight, and then challenge them if they were. And I realized, first of all, that the debate at the planning meeting or the council meeting in the evening, where the public were in the gallery, was a farce, and that the decision had been made before the meeting even started of what the outcome was going to be. I dug a bit further and realized that actually what was happening, it was members of all the major parties on the Isle of Wight, key members, not every councillor, key members of these parties were meeting at the Freemasons' temple in the afternoon. And then they were going to the council meeting and voting as decided. So I started, even in a kind of small example of the Isle of Wight, I started to see actually the decisions are not made in the way that they appear to be made. And then as my life unfolded through the 1990s and I started to gather more and more information globally about how this worked, I wanted to know the structure. I knew by then that a few people were dictating global society, but the question was, how do they do it? How is it done? Because on the face of it, like I say, you think it would be impossible, but it's not. I've uncovered this web, and there's a spider at the center of the web dictating the direction of human society by dictating how the web operates. And immediately around the spider, you've got the most, the strands of the web, but they represent the most exclusive secret societies. And then
what are those secret societies? Are they things like the Freemasons, or are they lower down?
They're further out. They're further out. I mean, a lot of these deep, exclusive secret societies, close to the quote spider, that some of them don't even have names. They're groupings of people. I mean, you know, as a journalist, they haven't got a name. It's very much more difficult to uncover it. And then they are the ones that really know the big picture. And the reason the few can control the many without the many knowing about it is all these secret societies, by their very nature, are fiercely compartmentalized. They operate in levels of degree, like Freemasonry, and that means a level of knowledge of what's going on. But what people don't realize is, although they'll see, yes, that happens in secret societies, it happens everywhere. You look at a university, you look at a government, you even look at a media organization, it's very compartmentalized. I mean, the journalist in the newsroom writing the story, he doesn't know what the conversation's going on between the owner or owners and the editor or the owners and other people above them. They've no idea. They just know what they need to know to do their job for the newspaper or whatever. They're all pyramids where the vast majority in the pyramid do not know what the organization is really about and what the agenda at the very top is really about. So it's basically a structure of compartmentalized ignorance. That's how it works. But one of the themes that I emphasize is that if you go, and this is the thing, where people say, well, you know about it, they couldn't keep it secret. Well, they can through this compartmentalization. And there's a point in these organizations, whether it's a major newspaper, whether it's Google, whether it's a bank, whatever, an intelligence operation, there's a point where they attach to the web. And at that point, they are doing the web's bidding. They are working with organizations that in the public arena, in the public eye, appear to have no connection with them whatsoever. So you go deep enough into Google, and it attaches to the web. You go deep enough into the BBC, attaches to the web. Deep enough into CNN, and it attached to the web. So the media at that level is basically working as one unit. Now, from that point of attachment to the web, what are you looking at in terms of the organization? You're looking at the top of the organization. So the top of the organization that dictates down the pyramid to others in the organization, down through the editorial management to the journalists, this is going to be used or broadcast, this is not. You're going to ask that question, you're not going to ask that. This is how it works. It's a very simple organizational structure, and it has to be, otherwise it's too complex, it would fall apart. So when you are looking at organizations that appear to be unconnected, they may be for the vast majority of people that work for them, but there are levels of them where they're absolutely connected and working as one unit. This is why, I have this saying, when something comes out of nowhere and is suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. Because, and people say, well, how can they do that? Through this web.
Can I just stop you there? That brings to mind something that happened across our newspaper group. I've seen on YouTube. It also happened across the American channels at the same time, all reading the same script of fake news, beware of fake news, which seemed to be quite a way of stifling any questioning of something that doesn't follow the official narrative.
Yeah, that was the Sinclair group, I think, in America. And yeah, that's what they did. They sent out this script, and all these local stations that people think are working independently when they watch them, just for their area, were all reading the same script all over America. That was just a in-your-face example of what happens behind the scenes all the time.
So it's like any questioning. I wouldn't mind moving on to 9/11 and talking about that a bit, but any questioning of that, it's, whoa, well, you've been listening to fake news. So what you've just described
fake
there...
news, of course.
Yeah.
Fake news is a wonderful inversion, a wonderful example of the inversion. Is there fake news in the alternative media? Of course there is. There's fake news everywhere. But within the so-called news alternative media is a tremendous amount of information that it's vital that people know that they won't get through the mainstream. Whereas, we've discussed how the mainstream of journalism doesn't question things, but just supports the official narrative. That is fake news. So it's an old technique. You accuse the ones you want to discredit of doing what you yourself are doing. All these people, they say the Russians are lying, the Russians are this, the Russians are that, and all they're doing is accusing Russia of doing what they're doing themselves. And this is what the fake news is. It's inverting the truth of where the real fake news lies.
I suppose in regard to the overall web that you're talking about, people describe that as the most ginormous conspiracy theory of all time, but I don't even like using that word anymore, because I think you've mentioned in the past that conspiracy theories was a phrase cooked up by the CIA to discredit anyone questioning an official narrative.
Yeah, that's right. During the 60s, when people were understandably asking questions about the Kennedy assassination with its magic bullet theory, with this bullet that kind of went through a number of people and changed direction at extraordinary angles, they wanted to discredit anyone questioning the Kennedy assassination and other assassinations, of course, in America in the 60s. And so they sent out, and you can see it, you can see it on the internet. There's a document they sent out to major media operations encouraging them to use the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists to discredit people that were saying the official story of the assassination of Kennedy makes no sense. And so because of this ignorance we have talked about of mainstream journalism about the world, they are using now by reflex action, or you're a conspiracy theorist, it's a conspiracy theory, something that was put out by the CIA, but they will have no idea about that. There's a simple thing about conspiracy theories, and that is, are they true? Now, that's not a question that mainstream journalism ever asks, in my experience. They don't say, okay, this guy's claiming this, let's look at the evidence to see it's true. It's a reflex action response of it's a conspiracy theory, therefore we can't take it seriously. But of course, a conspiracy theory that says it's the Russians on